I didn't grow up playing Monopoly. In my family, we played those cooperation board games that were a big thing in the 1970s. The games would last for days, and nobody won. We didn't eat chocolate. We had carob, and they used to say it tastes just like chocolate. Trust me, it really didn't. Instead of Disneyland, we would go on research trips to Guatemala. So as a kid, my parents' politics were all around me. It was in the piles of books and papers at my mom's house, and in the TV that sat unwatched in the closet. It was dinner time talks with my dad about his latest legal battles to help people who'd been hurt by chemical exposure in neighborhoods or farms or fields. And while I always thought what my parents did was really cool, to be completely honest with you, there were many times when I would just dream about playing with Barbies and watching Three's Company and eating Cheetos. I didn't always get the why behind their work. Not until 6th grade. That year, my mother took me with her to meet with farm worker organizers who were working in central Ohio. We met with one lead organizer in her home next to huge agricultural fields. She was in her mid-30s, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and as we talked, her kids played in the dirt yard outside, and I sat with my own little notebook to do some reporting. She said to us, "We're fighting for wages we can live on. We're fighting for bathroom breaks and porta potties in the fields. We're fighting for protection from toxic chemicals." And as I listened, I tried to imagine what it would be like to work for an entire day and still not have enough money to feed your family. And I tried to imagine my own mom coming home and having to change her clothes before she could hug me because she was afraid she'd tracked in pesticides from the fields. I was sitting on a short stool next to my mom with my notebook on my knee when the organizer leaned forward and with a quieter voice, she said, "Last year I was diagnosed with cancer. I think it's related to the chemicals." She's got cancer, I thought, from her job. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her everything was going to be okay. It felt strange at that moment just to be leaving. And she saw us, it seemed, at that point as a mother and daughter, and some of the distance between us went away. And she asked, "Why don't more people care about this?" As a 12-year-old, it was the very first time that I understood that the way we're producing food is affecting the very people working to bring it to our plates. And her question stuck with me for years. Why don't more people care about this? It was also perhaps the first time that I understood how empathy can connect us to the story of our food, to the people producing it, from farm workers in Ohio to the millions across the food chain. Now, by high school, I had come to realize that my parents were sort of social change rock stars. They were publishing books and helping win class action lawsuits. And it was really inspiring to me, but also, honestly, it was also really overwhelming because I kept asking myself, how was I going to make a difference? In college, that question haunted me, and I dove in searching for the answer. I took Latin American history classes and educational policy. I took an entire graduate-level seminar about an obscure Brazilian novelist. I got chickenpox. I got depressed, really depressed. I had been working so hard, and I still wasn't finding an answer to that fundamental question, how was I going to make a difference? In my 20s, I thought I might find an answer in graduate school. It was 1999, and my first year there, I stumbled on an article about the World Trade Organization, or WTO, hosting its next meeting in Seattle. And I read about groups planning to protest, saying the proposed trade policy would impact the way countries all around the world would be able to protect their local foods and farmers, their environmental laws and labor regulations. And it seemed to me those protesters were bringing the very abstract debates I'd been studying in the classroom into the streets. And I decided I had to be there. So next thing I knew, I was standing in downtown Seattle, surrounded by tens of thousands of people. I was freezing cold and soaking wet, and I remember looking up and seeing in front of me what looked like an ocean of environmentalists dressed up as turtles. And then I glanced to my left, and I realized I had been marching alongside this really burly group of truck-driving Teamsters. And then I noticed on my right, there was a contingent of lesbian Avengers who were topless except for their electrical tape pasties. And I remember feeling so connected to every single one of these people. We were marching together and chanting in unison, and it was so clear this wasn't about environmentalists versus farmers or feminists versus workers, that this was about all of us together saying policy determined by people to protect the environment and workers and local foods and farming, that all of that should rule over policy written by business to benefit business. It was a really powerful experience of solidarity, and it gave me new clarity and new energy. Back at school, I started studying international activism and globalization and social movements, and some of that lingering self-doubt began to lift. I realized I had been sort of asking the wrong question all along. I had been asking, how was I going to make a difference? When it was so clear that all social movements are multi-generational, with progress occurring over decades. And that for me, one of the very best things I could do was tap into my parents' work and keep moving it forward. So that's just what I did. I said to my mother, let's revisit her first book, Diet for a Small Planet, a book that had touched millions of lives. And I said, let's pick up where it leaves off. Let's explore the world. Let's seek out movements that are helping unite farmers and the environment and workers. And let's share those stories. And so together we traveled to 5 continents documenting these movements. And to it all, I was able to bring my own quirky self, which included a big sense of adventure, a real eagle-eye observation, and oftentimes a really sharp pencil. I would draw a little cheese slicer icon in the margins every time I felt my mom's writing was getting a little bit too cheesy. And as we traveled, we saw totally incredible examples of interconnectedness. In Brazil, for instance, we connected with the landless workers movement, a radical land reform movement that had also started the first organic seed company in the country. And we asked them, we said, so did you start this company so that your farmer members wouldn't be exposed by pesticides in the fields? And they all said, well, yes, obviously, that was one reason. But the other really big reason is that we cared about our customers. We wanted to make sure that they had the best and safest food possible. What we discovered on our journey, I came to realize, was a certain kind of empathy. We tend to think of empathy as something individuals feel about other individuals, that very human capacity to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But what we saw on our journey was an empathy that's bigger and broader and more vast. It's the kind of empathy that allows us to consider the fate of people who we will never meet, of forests we'll never see, of songbirds we will never hear. It's the kind of empathy that allows radical lesbians and environmentalists and truckers to march together. It's what philosopher Roman Kaczmarek calls collective empathy. And it is just what we need to be taking on our biggest problems, whether it's hunger or climate change or inequality. So, how do we foster this collective empathy? How do we express it? I've come to believe that one of the most powerful ways to express and foster just such empathy is through food. Now, this might seem like a totally crazy idea to you, because a lot of people think of food as something that we just do as individuals for ourselves. And the choice for organic food, food grown without toxic chemicals, or meat and dairy produced without antibiotics or other drugs, that choice is often portrayed as a choice that you make for your health. Or worse, it is a choice that is maligned as a choice for the most out-of-touch foodie, the kind of people who care less about homeless people than they do about the temperature of their goat cheese. But what if we were to see this choice really differently? What if we were to see this choice as the choice for the farm worker who shouldn't have to face toxic pesticides just to do her job? Or for farmers who shouldn't experience higher rates of Parkinson's, certain cancers, or illnesses because of the chemicals they use? Or for communities who shouldn't have to live in the shadow of chemical manufacturers? What if we saw this choice as a way to express our collective empathy? Now, expressing collective empathy through food means going way beyond just what we do in the marketplace. It means taking a stand. It means taking a stand alongside the 21.5 million food workers in this country. It means taking a stand for policy that makes sure that all of us have access to good, healthy food. And more people are taking this stand, expressing their collective empathy in this way than ever before. Nearly 100,000 students have been part of an effort sweeping college campuses to push for food that's good for workers and the planet. Tens of thousands of people have been connected with farm worker organizers who are mobilizing for fair wages and human rights. And people are connecting directly with their farmers in numbers like we've never seen. In the past 10 years, the numbers of farmers markets in this country have doubled, and there are now twice as many farmers markets as there are Walmarts. At the root of all of this is collective empathy translated into action. It's what social movements have been about for millennia. It's called solidarity. Less than a year after I marched in those streets in Seattle, my mother and I went to the northern Indian state of the Punjab. And we went there to meet with farmers who had been devastated by chemical agriculture and were now adopting organic, non-chemical approaches. At the end of one particularly hot and sobering day of testimony, my mom and I were meeting with a smaller group of farmers in a hut off the main village square. They were all men, and they were extremely standoffish. And I remember thinking, we're not making any connection here at all. And then we started talking about agricultural trade policy, and I mentioned that I had been at that WTO protest in Seattle. "You were there?" one of them asked, and his eyes got huge. And suddenly it seemed like they were seeing us for the first time. One of the farmers took my hand and he said, "That protest was the first time that we understood people in your country cared. It meant so much to us." I thought back to that farm worker who I'd met in 6th grade. I didn't have an answer for her then, but I did now. More and more people do care, and they're expressing that collective empathy through the food choices they're making and the actions they're taking. Back in the Punjab, the farmer hadn't used the word empathy, but it was so clear. Our collective empathy had stretched from the streets of Seattle all the way around the world. Thank you.